I found the foreclosure notice taped to my cabin door on a Tuesday morning in March, and my hands started shaking so badly I nearly dropped my coffee mug right there on the porch. The document stated that the Mountain View HOA was proceeding with foreclosure proceedings against my property for an unpaid balance of $92, plus fees and interest that had somehow ballooned the total to over $3,000. I had owned this cabin in the mountains outside Asheville, North Carolina for 15 years, inherited it from my grandfather, and I had never missed a single HOA payment in all that time. My name is Connor Hughes, and I work as a freelance software developer, which means I spend most of my time at home. The cabin had been my sanctuary, my escape from the chaos of city life, and now some pencil pusher at the HOA was threatening to take it away over what amounted to pocket change. I immediately pulled out my phone and called the HOA office, my heart pounding against my ribcage like a drum. The woman who answered had a voice like nails on a chalkboard. Mountain View Homeowners Association, this is Brenda speaking. This is Connor Hughes from 4582 Pine Ridge Road. I just received a foreclosure notice and there has to be some kind of mistake. It says I owe $92, but I have automatic payments set up through my bank. Hold please. The line went silent for what felt like an eternity. I paced back and forth on my porch, watching the morning mist roll through the pine trees that surrounded my property. Finally, Brenda came back. Mr. Hughes, according to our records, you missed your quarterly assessment payment in December. That's impossible. I have bank statements that prove otherwise. Well, that's what our system shows. The late fee is $30, and then there are administrative fees, collection costs, and interest charges that have accrued over the past 3 months. 3 months? Why wasn't I notified sooner? We sent multiple notices to your address. I never received a single notice until this foreclosure threat today. And how does $92 turn into $3,000? Brenda's tone turned icy. The fee schedule is outlined in your HOA bylaws, Mr. Hughes. If you have a dispute, you can attend the next board meeting on Thursday at 7 in the evening. Good day. She hung up before I could respond. I stood there staring at my phone, anger bubbling up inside me. This was insane. I immediately logged into my bank account and pulled up my transaction history. Right there in black and white was the payment to Mountain View HOA on December 1st, cleared and processed. I took screenshots and printed out the bank statement, my printer whirring in the quiet of my home office. The next 48 hours crawled by like molasses. I couldn't focus on work, couldn't sleep properly, kept thinking about losing the cabin that held so many memories of my grandfather teaching me to fish in the nearby creek, showing me how to identify different bird species, telling me stories about his own father on this same porch. The cabin wasn't just property, it was family history. Thursday evening arrived with dark clouds rolling in from the west promising rain. I drove down the winding mountain road to the community center, where the HOA meetings were held, a small building that also served as the local library and event space. I arrived 15 minutes early, clutching a folder full of bank statements and documentation. The meeting room was already half full with other residents, most of them looking as unhappy as I felt. I recognized a few faces from neighborhood gatherings over the years, but didn't know many people well. I tended to keep to myself, which now seemed like a mistake. I took a seat in the third row and waited. At exactly 7 o'clock, the board members filed in and took their seats at a long table at the front of the room. The president of the HOA was a woman named Patricia Carmichael, and everything about her screamed entitled busybody. She had that specific haircut, the one that seemed to be issued along with a complaints department membership card, perfectly coiffed blonde hair with strategic highlights. She wore a navy blue blazer over a white blouse, pearl earrings, and an expression that suggested she smelled something unpleasant. Good evening, everyone. I call this meeting to order. Patricia's voice was clipped and authoritative. We have several items on the agenda tonight, including pool maintenance proposals, landscaping contracts, and architectural review submissions. I raised my hand. Excuse me, I need to address something urgent. Patricia looked at me like I had just tracked mud across her white carpet. We'll have a public comment period at the end of the meeting. This can't wait until the end. You're trying to foreclose on my property over a payment I actually made. Murmurs rippled through the room. Patricia's lips pursed into a thin line. Mr. Hughes, is it? The foreclosure proceedings are a legal matter being handled by our attorneys. If you have documentation proving payment, you should have submitted it to the office. I just found out about this on Tuesday. Your office never sent me any prior notices. Our records show that notices were sent, then your records are wrong. I stood up, my folder in hand. I have bank statements showing the payment cleared in December. I have proof right here. Patricia exchanged glances with the other board members, a man named Gerald Stevens and a woman named Linda Morrison. Both looked uncomfortable. Very well, Patricia said, her tone dripping with condescension. You may approach and present your documentation. I walked up to the table and laid out my bank statements, pointing to the highlighted transaction. Right there. December 1st. Payment to Mountain View HOA for $230, the quarterly assessment. Cleared and processed. Patricia barely glanced at the papers. This doesn't match our records. Perhaps there was an error in how the payment was coded when it was received. So you're admitting you might have received my payment but recorded it incorrectly. I'm not admitting anything. I'm saying that our system shows an unpaid balance, and until that balance is resolved, the foreclosure proceedings will continue. The anger I had been holding back erupted. You're threatening to take my home over your own bookkeeping error? That's theft. Mr. Hughes, I suggest you lower your voice. This is a professional meeting. Professional? There's nothing professional about threatening foreclosure without proper notice or investigation. How many other people here have been hit with bogus fees? I turned to address the room. Several hands went up. My stomach sank. Patricia banged a gavel on the table. That's enough, Mr. Hughes? You're out of order. Security, please escort him out, security. I looked around and saw an older man in a rent-a-cop uniform standing by the door. He looked about as interested in escorting me out as a cat in a bathtub. This is ridiculous. I'm leaving, but you haven't heard the last of this. I gathered my papers and walked out, my face burning with humiliation and rage. Behind me, I could hear Patricia continuing the meeting as if nothing had happened. The rain had started, cold drops pelting my face as I walked to my truck. I sat in the driver's seat for a long moment, rain drumming on the roof, trying to figure out my next move. The following morning, I called every real estate attorney in Asheville until I found one who specialized in HOA disputes. Her name was Margaret Foster, and she agreed to see me that same afternoon. Her office was in a converted Victorian house downtown, all hardwood floors and tall windows. Margaret herself was in her 50s, with silver-streaked dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail and sharp green eyes that missed nothing. "Tell me everything," she said, settling behind her desk with a legal pad. I walked her through the entire situation, from the foreclosure notice to the bank statements to the disastrous board meeting. She took notes, asking pointed questions about timing, documentation, and the HOA's bylaws. "Do you have a copy of the bylaws?" she asked. "Somewhere in my files at home. I haven't looked at them in years." "Get them. I need to see what their fee structure looks like and what their requirements are for notice before foreclosure." In North Carolina, HOAs are required to follow specific procedures before they can foreclose. They can't just slap a notice on your door and call it good. "How much is this going to cost me?" Margaret leaned back in her chair. "I'll be straight with you, Connor. HOA cases can get expensive because these boards often dig in their heels, especially when they realize they've made a mistake. But from what you're telling me, they've violated several statutes. We might be able to turn this around quickly. I'll need a $5,000 retainer to start." My heart sank. $5,000 to fight over $92. But what choice did I have? "Let me think about it." "Don't think too long. Foreclosure proceedings move fast once they start. If they file in court, it becomes much harder and more expensive to stop." I left her office feeling worse than when I had arrived. $5,000 was a significant chunk of money, and there was no guarantee I would win. I drove home in a daze, the mountains rising around me like silent sentinels. The cabin came into view as I rounded the last curve, and something fierce and protective surged through me. This was my home, my grandfather's legacy. I wasn't going to let some power-hungry HOA president take it without a fight. That evening, I dug through my filing cabinet until I found the HOA bylaws, a thick document I had been given when I first inherited the property. I started reading, highlighting relevant sections. The bylaws stated that before foreclosure, the HOA must send written notice to the homeowner at least 30 days prior, providing an opportunity to cure the default. They must also attempt to contact the homeowner by phone and email. None of that had happened. I took pictures of the relevant pages and emailed them to Margaret. She called me back within an hour. "This is even better than I thought," she said, and I could hear the satisfaction in her voice. "They've violated their own bylaws and state law. We can file an emergency motion to halt the foreclosure and potentially countersue for harassment and wrongful foreclosure proceedings. Let's do it. I'll need that retainer. I'll bring you a check tomorrow morning." I hung up and sat at my kitchen table looking out at the darkening forest. A deer wandered past, pausing to look at the cabin before continuing on its way. I had made my decision. This fight was worth it. The next 6 weeks were a blur of legal documents, court filings, and mounting stress. Margaret filed an emergency motion to halt the foreclosure, and we got a hearing date set for mid-April. In the meantime, the HOA continued adding fees to my supposed debt. Every week, I received a new statement showing additional administrative costs, legal fees, and interest charges. The total had climbed to nearly $4,000. Margaret assured me that these fees were likely unenforceable, especially since we could prove I had made the original payment, but it was still terrifying to watch the number grow. I started having nightmares about showing up at the cabin to find it locked, my belongings on the lawn, strangers moving in. Work suffered. I missed deadlines for clients, something I had never done before. My savings account dwindled as I paid Margaret's retainer and additional fees for filing costs and expert witnesses. She wanted to bring in a forensic accountant to examine the HOA's books, which cost another $2,000, but she insisted it was necessary. These cases often reveal patterns of mismanagement or even fraud, Margaret explained during one of our meetings. If the HOA has done this to you, they've probably done it to others. We need to show the judge that this isn't an isolated incident. The forensic accountant, a meticulous man named Robert Chen, found exactly what Margaret suspected. The HOA's books were a mess, with numerous discrepancies, missing documentation, and payments that had been misapplied or not recorded at all. At least 15 other homeowners had similar issues, though none had reached foreclosure stage yet. This is negligence at best, intentional misconduct at worst, Robert said during a conference call with Margaret and me. The HOA's treasurer should have caught these errors months ago. Either they're incompetent, or they're deliberately mismanaging funds. Can we prove which one? I asked. Not yet, but the pattern is suggestive. Several payments were coded as miscellaneous income instead of being applied to homeowner accounts. That money went into the general fund and was used for discretionary expenses, like what? New furniture for the community center, landscaping upgrades around the HOA office, a holiday party for the board members. I felt sick. They used our money for their own benefit? Potentially, yes. We'll need to dig deeper. The hearing date arrived on a cold, rainy morning in April. I put on my best suit, a charcoal gray number I usually reserved for client meetings and weddings, and met Margaret at the courthouse in Asheville. The building was an imposing structure of stone and glass, all sharp angles and serious faces. Patricia Carmichael was there with the rest of the board and their attorney, a slick-looking man in an expensive suit named David Richardson. Patricia wore another blazer, this one in burgundy, and her expression when she saw me could have curdled milk. We went through security and made our way to the courtroom on the 3rd floor. The room was smaller than I expected, with wood paneling and fluorescent lights that cast everything in a harsh glow. Judge Thomas Brennan presided, a man in his 60s with gray hair and reading glasses perched on his nose. "All rise," the bailiff announced, and we stood as the judge entered. The hearing began with opening statements. David Richardson went first, arguing that the HOA had followed all proper procedures, that I had failed to pay my assessment, and that the foreclosure was justified under the bylaws and state law. "The homeowner has had ample opportunity to resolve this matter," Richardson said smoothly. "Multiple notices were sent, and he failed to respond until the foreclosure proceedings were already underway. The HOA has a fiduciary duty to all residents to collect assessments and maintain the community." Then it was Margaret's turn. She stood with quiet confidence, laying out our case with precision. "Your Honor, Mr. Hughes did pay his December assessment on time. We have bank records proving this payment cleared. The HOA failed to properly record the payment, then proceeded with foreclosure without providing the required notice under their own bylaws or North Carolina law. Furthermore, our investigation has revealed a pattern of mismanagement and potential fraud within the HOA's financial records that affects numerous residents." Judge Brennan leaned forward. "That's a serious allegation, Counselor. We have documentation to support it, Your Honor. Our forensic accountant has prepared a detailed report." "I'll hear testimony, Mr. Richardson. Call your first witness." The HOA's treasurer, a nervous-looking man named Philip Dawson, took the stand. He was in his 40s, balding, with a sheen of sweat on his forehead despite the cool temperature in the courtroom. Richardson walked him through the HOA's accounting system, how payments were processed, and how notices were sent for delinquent accounts. "And you're certain that Mr. Hughes's December payment was not received?" Richardson asked. "According to our records, no payment was recorded for Mr. Hughes in December," Philip said, his voice shaky. Margaret stood for cross-examination. "Mr. Dawson, how long have you been the HOA treasurer?" "About 2 years. "And what is your professional background in accounting or finance?" I'm a retired postal worker. I volunteered for the position." "So you have no formal training in accounting?" "No, but I'm very organized." A few people in the gallery snickered. Judge Brennan frowned. "Order," Margaret continued. "Mr. Dawson, how many payment discrepancies have been reported to you in the past year?" "I don't recall the exact number. More than 5? More than 10? "Maybe, Mr. Dawson. Our forensic accountant found at least 23 documented complaints about misapplied or missing payments in your records." "Does that sound accurate?" Philip's face went pale. "I may have missed a few." "A few?" "Mr. Dawson, would you say your record-keeping system is reliable?" "I do my best." "That's not what I asked. Is your system reliable?" "Objection," Richardson said. "Argumentative." "Overruled," Judge Brennan said. "Answer the question, Mr. Dawson." There may be some issues that need to be addressed, Philip admitted quietly. Margaret presented the bank statement showing my payment, blown up on a large poster board for everyone to see. This shows that Mr. Hughes's payment cleared on December 1st. Can you explain why it wasn't recorded in your system? I can't explain that. Did you bother to contact Mr. Hughes before initiating foreclosure proceedings? We sent letters. Did you call him? No, email him. I don't have his email address. Did you ask for it? No, so you sent letters that Mr. Hughes never received and made no other attempt to contact him before proceeding with foreclosure over $92. Is that correct? We followed our procedures that are clearly inadequate and possibly illegal under North Carolina law. Objection. Richardson was on his feet. Sustained, Judge Brennan said. Counselor, save the arguments for closing. Margaret nodded. No further questions. Philip practically fled from the witness stand. Next, Patricia took the stand and I watched her carefully. She maintained her composed, superior demeanor, but there was a tightness around her eyes that suggested stress. Richardson walked her through her role as HOA president, the board's responsibilities, and the decision to proceed with foreclosure. Patricia answered each question with practiced ease, painting a picture of a diligent board doing its duty. We have a responsibility to all homeowners to ensure that assessments are paid, Patricia said. When someone doesn't pay, it affects the entire community. We have to take action. Then Margaret stood for cross-examination, and I could see Patricia brace herself. Mrs. Carmichael, when did you personally become aware that Mr. Hughes had supposedly not paid his December assessment? In January, when I reviewed the delinquent accounts report. And what action did you take? I instructed the treasurer to send a notice, just one notice, initially, yes. And when that notice supposedly received no response, what did you do? We sent additional notices and eventually authorized our attorney to begin foreclosure proceedings. Did you ever pick up the phone and call Mr. Hughes yourself? Patricia's jaw tightened. That's not my responsibility. We have procedures. But you're the president of the HOA. Don't you think that before taking someone's home, you might want to make a personal effort to resolve the issue? We're a volunteer board. We can't handhold every homeowner who doesn't pay their bills. Mr. Hughes did pay his bill, Mrs. Carmichael. You failed to record it properly. That's not what our records show. Margaret pulled out another exhibit, a thick stack of papers. Mrs. Carmichael, are you aware that the HOA spent over $15,000 on discretionary expenses last year that weren't budgeted or approved by the homeowners? Patricia's face flushed. I don't know what you're referring to. New furniture for the community center, professional landscaping around the HOA office, a holiday party at an expensive restaurant. Ring any bells? Those were necessary expenses for community improvement. Were they approved by a vote of the homeowners? The board has discretionary authority for certain expenditures. According to the bylaws, expenditures over $5,000 require homeowner approval. You spent $15,000 without authorization. Would you call that responsible stewardship? Richardson objected again, and Judge Brennan sustained it, but the damage was done. I could see the judge's expression had shifted from neutral to skeptical. Margaret called Robert Chen, the forensic accountant, as our next witness. Robert was calm and methodical, walking through his findings with charts and graphs that showed the pattern of missing payments, misapplied funds, and questionable expenses. He explained how my payment had been coded as miscellaneous income and deposited into the general fund, then used for expenses that benefited the board members directly. In my professional opinion, Robert concluded, the HOA's financial management is substandard at best and potentially fraudulent at worst. Multiple homeowners have been charged late fees and penalties for payments that were actually made but not properly recorded. The total amount of these improper charges exceeds $50,000 over the past 2 years. A gasp went through the courtroom. Judge Brennan removed his glasses and rubbed his eyes. $50,000? Yes, Your Honor. And that's just what I could document with the records provided. There may be more. I took the stand last telling my story in my own words. I explained about inheriting the cabin from my grandfather, about setting up automatic payments to avoid ever missing a bill, about the shock of finding the foreclosure notice on my door. Margaret let me speak without much interruption, and I could feel the judge's attention on me. This cabin is my home, I said, my voice breaking slightly. It's where I grew up spending summers with my grandfather. It's where I learned to appreciate nature, to find peace. The HOA is trying to take it away over money I actually paid, and they've made my life a living hell for the past 2 months. I've spent thousands of dollars defending myself against their mistake. I just want this nightmare to end. Richardson's cross-examination was brief and ineffective. He tried to make me seem irresponsible or negligent, but I had documentation for everything. I had made my payments on time, kept my property in good condition, followed all the rules. There was nothing he could attack. Closing arguments were dramatic. Richardson tried to salvage the HOA's position, arguing that mistakes happen and the board had acted in good faith. Margaret demolished that argument, pointing out the pattern of negligence, the violations of state law, and the board's refusal to investigate or resolve the issue once it was brought to their attention. "Your Honor, this isn't about $92, Margaret said. "This is about an HOA board that has abused its power, mismanaged funds, and attempted to steal a man's home rather than admit they made a mistake. The law requires HOAs to act responsibly and follow proper procedures. This board has done neither. We're asking the court to not only halt the foreclosure but to order an independent audit of the HOA's finances, remove the current board members, and award damages to Mr. Hughes for the stress, expense, and emotional harm he has suffered." Judge Brennan called a brief recess to review the evidence. I sat in the hallway with Margaret, my leg bouncing nervously. 20 minutes felt like 20 hours. Finally, the bailiff called us back in. "I've reviewed the evidence and testimony," Judge Brennan began, "and I find that the HOA violated both their own bylaws and North Carolina statutes governing HOA foreclosure procedures. The evidence clearly shows that Mr. Hughes made his December payment on time. The HOA's failure to properly record that payment is their error, not his. Furthermore, the forensic accounting report reveals a troubling pattern of mismanagement that requires further investigation." Patricia's face had gone white. The other board members looked equally stricken. Therefore, the judge continued, "I am issuing the following orders. First, the foreclosure proceedings against Mr. Hughes are hereby reversed and dismissed with prejudice. The HOA is prohibited from attempting to collect any amount from Mr. Hughes related to the December assessment or any associated fees, penalties, or legal costs." Relief flooded through me so powerfully I felt dizzy. Second, I am ordering the HOA to pay Mr. Hughes damages in the amount of $15,000 to compensate him for legal fees, stress, and the wrongful foreclosure action. My jaw dropped. $15,000. That would cover Margaret's fees and then some. Third, I am ordering an immediate independent audit of the Mountain View HOA's finances, to be conducted by a court-appointed accountant at the HOA's expense. The current board is suspended from handling any financial matters pending the results of that audit. Patricia stood up. "Your Honor, this is outrageous. We were just trying to do our duty." "Mrs. Carmichael, your duty includes basic competence and following the law. You've demonstrated neither." "Sit down." Patricia sat, her face mottled red with anger and humiliation. "Fourth, I am referring this matter to the district attorney's office for investigation of potential fraud. If the audit reveals criminal wrongdoing, charges may be filed." Now everyone in the courtroom was murmuring. The bailiff called for order. "Fifth, and finally, I am imposing a fine of $10,000 on the HOA board collectively for violations of state law and abuse of the foreclosure process. That fine is to be paid from board members' personal funds, not from HOA reserves. Do you understand?" The board members nodded mutely, looking shell-shocked. "This court is adjourned." Judge Brennan banged his gavel and it was over. I turned to Margaret and she was grinning. "We won. We actually won." "You were amazing," I said, feeling tears prick my eyes. "You had a solid case. The board made it easy." We gathered our materials and left the courtroom. In the hallway, several other residents from the community approached me, thanking me for fighting back and asking how they could file complaints about their own payment issues. I gave them Margaret's card and suggested they contact her office. Patricia and the other board members hurried past without making eye contact, their attorney talking urgently on his phone. I didn't gloat or say anything to them. I just felt relieved that it was over. The drive home was the first peaceful drive I had taken in 2 months. The mountains were green with spring growth, wildflowers dotting the roadsides, and the sky was a brilliant blue. I pulled up to the cabin and sat in my truck for a moment, just looking at it. My home, safe. Over the next few weeks, the fallout from the court decision rippled through the community. The independent audit revealed even more problems than Robert Chen had initially found. The HOA had been mismanaging funds for at least 3 years, and the total amount of improper charges and misapplied payments exceeded $75,000. The district attorney did indeed file charges against Patricia and Philip for fraud and embezzlement. It turned out that Patricia had been using HOA funds to pay for personal expenses, disguising them as community improvements. The new furniture for the community center had actually gone to her house. The landscaping work had been done on her property. She had essentially been stealing from the homeowners for years, and the sloppy record-keeping had been a feature, not a bug, designed to hide her theft. The trial was held in August, and I attended as a witness. Patricia maintained her innocence, claiming everything had been legitimate expenses, but the evidence was overwhelming. She was convicted on multiple counts of fraud and embezzlement and sentenced to 3 years in prison. Philip received probation and community service for his role, as the court determined he had been negligent rather than malicious. The HOA itself underwent a complete restructuring. New board members were elected, proper accounting systems were put in place, and every homeowner received a detailed accounting of their payments and any amounts they were owed in refunds. I received a formal apology letter from the new board president, a reasonable woman named Carol Jensen, who worked as an accountant and actually knew what she was doing. The $15,000 in damages from the court judgment arrived in September, deposited into my account with no fanfare. I used most of it to pay off Margaret's final bill and put the rest into savings. The cabin was safe, my name was clear, and justice had been served. But the impact went beyond just my case. News of the lawsuit spread through HOA communities across western North Carolina. Other residents began scrutinizing their own boards more carefully, demanding transparency and accountability. Several other HOAs discovered their own financial irregularities and took corrective action. In a strange way, my nightmare had sparked a small movement toward better HOA governance in the region. I ran into Carol Jensen at the grocery store in October, about 6 months after the court decision. She approached me in the produce section, looking slightly nervous. "Connor, I'm glad I ran into you," she said. "I wanted to personally apologize again for what Patricia and the old board put you through. It was inexcusable. I appreciate that. From what I've heard, you're doing a good job cleaning things up. We're trying. We've implemented new financial controls, hired a professional management company to handle the accounting, and we're working through the refunds for everyone who was overcharged. It's a mess, but we're making progress." "That's good to hear. I also wanted you to know that we've amended the bylaws to require much stricter procedures before any foreclosure action can be taken. What happened to you will never happen again, not on my watch." "I'm glad to hear it. No one should have to go through what I went through." Carol nodded emphatically. "Absolutely, and if you ever want to get involved with the board, we could use someone who actually cares about doing things right." I laughed. "Thanks, but I think I'll pass. I've had enough of HOA politics to last a lifetime." "I don't blame you." She smiled and moved on to examine the tomatoes. The following months passed quietly, which was exactly what I wanted. I focused on my work, took up hiking more seriously, and started dating a woman named Hannah Thompson who worked at the local library. She was smart, funny, and blessedly uninterested in homeowner association drama. "So you're famous for fighting the HOA," Hannah said one evening as we sat on my porch watching the sunset. We had been dating for about a month, and I had finally told her the whole story. "I wouldn't say famous, more like locally notorious. It's actually pretty impressive. Most people would have just paid the money and moved on." "It wasn't about the money. It was about principle and my grandfather's legacy. I couldn't just let them take this place." Hannah reached over and squeezed my hand. "Your grandfather would be proud of you." I thought about that for a moment, looking out at the trees that surrounded the property, the same trees my grandfather had shown me how to identify by their leaves and bark. I hope so. The holidays approached, and I found myself reflecting on everything that had happened. What had started as a terrifying threat to my home had ultimately exposed corruption, brought justice, and led to positive changes for an entire community. It had cost me time, money, and countless hours of stress, but I'd stood my ground and won. I invited Hannah to spend Christmas at the cabin. We cut down a tree from the property, something my grandfather and I had done every year when I was young. We decorated it with lights and ornaments, many of which had belonged to my grandfather. On Christmas morning, we exchanged gifts by the fireplace, and I felt a contentment I hadn't experienced in years. "This place is special," Hannah said, sipping her coffee and looking around the cabin. "I can see why you fought so hard for it. It's not just a building, it's home, it's family, it's where I belong." "I get that." In January, I received a final piece of mail from the Mountain View HOA. It was a check for $230, the refund of my December assessment payment that they had finally located in their records after the audit. I stared at it for a long moment, then started laughing. After everything that had happened, all the legal battles and court hearings and stress, here was the original $92 plus the rest of my quarterly payment returned to me as if nothing had happened. I deposited the check and used the money to take Hannah out to a nice dinner in Asheville. We went to a steakhouse with a view of the city lights, and over dessert I told her about the refund check. "So you ended up getting your money back, plus $15,000 in damages, plus you helped expose a corrupt board and got them sent to prison. Not a bad outcome." "When you put it that way, it sounds almost worth it." "Almost. I would have preferred to avoid the whole thing. But if it had to happen, I'm glad it turned out the way it did." Hannah raised her wine glass. "To standing up for yourself even when it's hard." I clinked my glass against hers. "To fighting the good fight." February brought snow to the mountains, transforming the landscape into a winter wonderland. I spent my days working from the cabin, watching the snow fall through my office window, and my evenings with Hannah, who had essentially moved in by that point without us officially discussing it. She just started leaving clothes in my closet, toiletries in my bathroom, books on my shelves. It felt natural and right. One evening, as we sat by the fire, Hannah brought up something that had been on my mind as well. "Have you thought about what you would have done if you had lost the case?" she asked. I had thought about it, more than I wanted to admit. I probably would have appealed, taken it as far as I could. But honestly, if I had lost the cabin, I don't know if I ever would have gotten over it. This place is too important to me. Would you have bought another property somewhere else? Maybe eventually. But it wouldn't have been the same. This cabin, this land, it's tied to my family history. You can't replace that. Hannah nodded thoughtfully. I understand. I feel the same way about my grandmother's house in Raleigh. It's been in our family for 3 generations. If someone tried to take it, I'd fight with everything I had. Then you understand why I did what I did. Completely. March marked 1 year since I had found the foreclosure notice on my door. I thought about marking the anniversary somehow, but decided against it. Some things were better left in the past. Instead, I focused on the future. My relationship with Hannah was growing stronger. My business was thriving, the cabin was secure, life was good. I did attend one more HOA meeting in April just to see how things had changed. Carol Jensen ran an efficient, professional meeting. Financial reports were detailed and transparent. Decisions were made by vote, with input from residents. It was night and day compared to Patricia's reign. During the public comment period, an older gentleman stood up and thanked me by name for fighting back against the previous board. Several other people applauded. I felt my face flush with embarrassment and pride. Connor's case was a wake-up call for all of us, Carol said from the front of the room. It showed us what can happen when boards lose sight of their purpose and start abusing their power. We've learned from those mistakes, and we're committed to doing better. More applause. I nodded in acknowledgement and sat down, ready for the meeting to move on to other topics. Summer arrived with warm sunshine and the smell of pine needles baking in the heat. Hannah and I spent weekends hiking the trails around the property, swimming in the creek, having barbecues on the porch. I taught her how to identify different bird species, passing on the knowledge my grandfather had given me. She taught me about local history, sharing stories she had learned from the library's archives. One evening in July, as we watched fireflies dance across the yard, Hannah turned to me with a serious expression. "I've been thinking," she said. "About what? About us, about the future." My heart started beating faster. Okay. I love it here. I love being with you. I love this cabin and these mountains and the life we're building. I don't want to go back to my apartment in town. I want to stay here with you, permanently. I pulled her close. "I want that too. Really? Really, you belong here with me." We kissed as the fireflies continued their ancient dance, and I felt the last piece of my life click into place. The cabin was safe, my home was secure, and I had someone to share it with. In August, we made it official. Hannah gave up her apartment and moved in completely. We merged our lives, our belongings, our futures. She kept her job at the library and commuted into town 3 days a week. I continued my freelance work. We adopted a dog from the local shelter, a golden retriever mix named Ranger, who loved hiking as much as we did. Patricia's appeals finally ran out in September, and her conviction was upheld. I read about it in the local paper over breakfast one morning. Hannah looked at the article and shook her head. 3 years in prison. Was it worth it for her, do you think? Stealing from her neighbors for some furniture and landscaping? People convince themselves that they deserve things, I said. She probably told herself that she was working hard for the HOA and deserved compensation. But that's not how it works. You can't just take what isn't yours. I'm glad she got caught. Me too. October brought fall colors to the mountains, painting the landscape in brilliant reds, oranges, and golds. Hannah and I took long drives through the countryside, stopping at farm stands for apple cider and pumpkins. Ranger bounded through piles of fallen leaves, barking joyfully. One afternoon, we drove past the HOA office and community center. There was a new sign out front, "Under new management." I smiled at the phrase. It seemed appropriate. "Do you ever regret fighting back?" Hannah asked as we drove home. "No, never. It was the right thing to do. Even with all the stress and expense, even with all that, some things are worth fighting for. This place, my grandfather's legacy, the principle of standing up to bullies. I couldn't let them win." "Good," Hannah said, reaching over to squeeze my hand. "Because I wouldn't have fallen in love with someone who gave up without a fight." I glanced at her in surprise. It was the first time either of us had used the word love. "You love me?" "Of course I do, you stubborn, principled, wonderful man. I love you too." We drove the rest of the way home in comfortable silence. Ranger's head stuck out the back window, the autumn sun slanting through the trees. When we pulled up to the cabin, I looked at it with fresh eyes, seeing not just a building but a symbol of everything I had fought for and everything I had gained. Thanksgiving came, and we hosted dinner at the cabin for the first time. Hannah invited her parents and sister. I invited a few friends from the area and some of the neighbors from the HOA community, including Carol Jensen. It was a full house, warm and noisy and perfect, over turkey and stuffing. Carol asked me if I had heard that the state legislature was considering new laws to regulate HOA foreclosure procedures, inspired in part by my case. Really? I asked, surprised. Really? A state representative read about what happened and decided to sponsor a bill requiring more stringent notice requirements and limiting the fees HOAs can charge before foreclosure. They're calling it the Homeowner Protection Act. That's incredible, Hannah said, beaming at me with pride. It hasn't passed yet, Carol cautioned, but it has bipartisan support. People are tired of HOAs abusing their power. Your case helped shine a light on the problem. I didn't know what to say. The idea that my personal nightmare might lead to laws protecting other people was overwhelming in the best possible way. If it passes, I finally said, maybe some other homeowner won't have to go through what I went through. That's the goal, Carol agreed. December brought the first real snow of the season, heavy and wet, piling up on the porch railing and the branches of the pine trees. Hannah and I spent Christmas Eve building a fire, drinking hot chocolate, and watching It's a Wonderful Life on my old television. Ranger sprawled on the rug, occasionally twitching in his sleep, probably dreaming of chasing squirrels. This is perfect, Hannah murmured, curled up against my side on the couch. It really is. Can I ask you something? Anything. If you could go back and change things, avoid the whole HOA nightmare, would you? I thought about it carefully. A year ago, I would have said yes in a heartbeat. But now, I'm not so sure. The fight led to justice, not just for me, but for a lot of people. It exposed corruption and led to real change. And it brought me you in a roundabout way. How so? If I hadn't been spending so much time at the library researching HOA laws and looking at legal precedents, I never would have met you. Hannah smiled. I remember when you first came in, you looked so stressed and determined. I wanted to help you. You did help me, more than you know. We kissed, and outside the snow continued to fall, blanketing the world in peaceful white silence. The new year arrived with hope and possibility. The Homeowner Protection Act passed in early January with overwhelming support. I was invited to the state capitol for the signing ceremony, where the governor acknowledged my case specifically as one of the inspirations for the legislation. Cameras flashed as I shook hands with legislators and the governor. The whole experience felt surreal. You're a minor celebrity now, Hannah teased on the drive home. I'm really not. People will forget about this in a week, maybe, but the law will still be there, protecting people. That's what matters. She was right, of course. The law was what mattered. It required HOAs to provide at least 60 days' notice before foreclosure, mandated multiple contact attempts through different methods, capped pre-foreclosure fees at reasonable amounts, and gave homeowners a clear path to dispute charges before losing their homes. It wasn't perfect, but it was better than what existed before. February brought an unexpected visitor. Philip Dawson, the former HOA treasurer, showed up at my door on a cold Saturday morning. I almost didn't recognize him at first. He had lost weight and looked older, worn down by the events of the past year, Mr. Hughes, he said nervously. I'm sorry to bother you. I just wanted to talk to you for a minute, if that's okay. I considered turning him away, but curiosity won out. All right, come in. We sat in my living room, Ranger eyeing Philip suspiciously from his bed by the fireplace. I wanted to apologize, Philip began, his hands twisting together in his lap, for everything that happened. I know I was negligent. I should have caught the errors in the accounting. I should have pushed back against Patricia when she wanted to spend money that wasn't authorized. I should have done a lot of things differently. Yes, you should have, I said bluntly. I know. I've been seeing a therapist, trying to understand why I let it happen. I think I was just overwhelmed and in over my head. I never should have taken the treasurer position. I didn't have the skills for it. Then why did you take it? Because no one else wanted to do it, and Patricia was very persuasive. She made me feel like I was helping the community. By the time I realized how badly I was screwing up, it felt too late to quit. I knew the books were a mess, but I didn't know how to fix them, and I was too embarrassed to ask for help. I studied him. He seemed genuine, broken down by guilt and consequences. What do you want from me, Philip? Nothing. I just wanted you to know that I'm sorry. What happened to you was wrong, and I played a part in it. I'll have to live with that for the rest of my life. I'm paying restitution to the HOA and doing community service. My reputation is destroyed. But none of that changes what I did to you and others. I'm truly sorry. We sat in silence for a moment. Finally, I nodded. I appreciate the apology. It doesn't change what happened, but I appreciate it. Thank you. Philip stood to leave. I won't take up any more of your time. I hope you're doing well. I am. And Philip, for what it's worth, I hope you can move forward from this and learn from it. I'm trying. That's all I can do. After he left, Hannah emerged from the bedroom where she had been giving us privacy. That took courage, coming here to apologize, she said. It did. He made mistakes, bad ones. But he's not evil like Patricia, he was just incompetent and weak. Do you forgive him? I thought about it. I don't know yet, but I'm glad he apologized. It's a start. Spring arrived with a riot of wildflowers and baby animals. Ranger discovered a family of rabbits living under our shed and spent hours watching them with intense fascination, though he never actually chased them. Hannah planted a garden, growing vegetables and herbs that we used in our cooking. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm. In April, almost exactly 2 years after the court hearing, I received a letter from Margaret Foster. She had moved to a larger firm in Charlotte but wanted to update me on some news. Several more HOA cases similar to mine had been successfully resolved using the precedent set by my case and the new state laws. Homeowners across North Carolina were better protected now because I had stood up and fought back. You should be proud, the letter concluded. What you did made a real difference. I showed the letter to Hannah that evening on the porch. We were watching another sunset, Ranger at our feet, glasses of wine in our hands. She's right, Hannah said after reading it. You should be proud. I am. It's strange, though. I never set out to change laws or help other people. I just wanted to keep my cabin. That's how most change happens. One person decides that something is wrong and refuses to accept it. Then other people take notice and things start to shift. I guess so. You know what your grandfather would say if he were here? What? That you honored his legacy by fighting for this place? That you showed courage and principle, the same values he tried to teach you? My eyes stung with sudden tears. I hope so. I really hope so. Hannah leaned over and kissed my cheek. I know so. As the sun dipped below the mountains, painting the sky in shades of pink and purple, I reflected on everything that had happened since that terrible Tuesday morning when I found the foreclosure notice on my door. The fear, the anger, the stress, the legal battles, the victory, the changes, the growth. It had been a journey I never wanted to take, but one that had ultimately led me to a better place. The cabin stood solid and secure around us, my grandfather's legacy preserved for another generation. The HOA was under honest management, operating transparently and fairly. Patricia was in prison, paying for her crimes. Laws had been changed to protect other homeowners from similar nightmares, and I had found love with an amazing woman who understood what this place meant to me. $92 had almost cost me everything. Instead, standing up for what was right had given me more than I could have imagined. Not just keeping my home, but finding purpose, making a difference, and building a future worth fighting for. Ranger barked at something in the woods, probably a deer, and I scratched behind his ears. Hannah refilled our wine glasses. The night air carried the scent of pine and approaching summer. Somewhere an owl hooted and another answered. The mountains were eternal, unchanging even as everything else shifted and evolved. My grandfather had sat on this same porch decades ago, and now I sat here with the woman I loved, and someday maybe our children would sit here too, adding their own stories to the legacy of this place. The HOA had tried to take it all away over pocket change and pride. They had failed, and in failing they had made the world a little bit better for everyone who came after. Justice had been served, laws had been changed, and corrupt officials had faced consequences. It wasn't a perfect ending because real life never is, but it was a good ending. A fair ending. As darkness settled over the mountains and the stars began to appear overhead, I felt a profound sense of gratitude and peace. The fight had been worth it. Every stressful moment, every dollar spent, every sleepless night had led to this moment of quiet contentment and the knowledge that I had stood my ground when it mattered most. The cabin was safe, my home was secure, and that made all the difference in the world.